I want more people to believe in the opportunity of connection without having to invest really heavily in it.
School didn't teach us how to be good at love, so I created the Stubborn Love podcast to help you navigate it. With my expertise in the marriage therapy biz, I'll share insights on topics like sex, money, and navigating conflict, and more. No matter what stage of relationship you're in right now, this podcast is for you. Every episode has actionable tips that will help you create a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life with the people you love. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now and join me on this journey of love and learning for the stuff they didn't teach you in relationship school. Welcome back to another episode, listeners. I am very excited about today's episode. This is actually a first meeting with our guest today, but we have so much to talk about. And, we're actually going to start off with some juicy gossip about Dr. Phil, and then I'll let Noah introduce themselves in a little bit. But okay, you have to tell me what's going on with Dr. Phil here.
Okay, so this is like fresh from the gossip oven. So Dr. Phil's production reached out to me and they were like, non-monogamy is becoming really cool and we want to do an episode about non-monogamy. So let's discuss if you want to come with your polycule. And we jump on this call, right, with this producer from Texas. And she frames the discussion this way, right? She says, hey, it's true, Dr. Phil is fairly conservative. If you read about him, you can learn that they don't say it officially. But Dr. Phil is really over the fact that the networks are either one side or the next side, right? Like we don't want a one-sided conversation. So really what we want to do is bring in a more balanced viewpoint of key discussions. And today, one of the key topics is the future of families in America. And Dr. Phil is actually pretty concerned about the future of families in America. So he really wants to come and have a lively and respectful debate about non-monogamy. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's good. So what is that going to look like? So this person says, well, you're going to represent non-monogamy. And the way it's going to work is we're going to come to your house. We're going to take some videos of you with your family and your polycule and capture a lot of footage. And then we're going to fly you to Texas and we're going to put you on stage. We're going to show some of these clips that we've edited. And then you're going to represent non-monogamy in this fruitful debate. And I was like, okay, great. Who are we debating with? So they say, well, we're going to bring a professional healthcare psychologist that doesn't believe in non-monogamy. And they're specifically focused on child development and family systems. And I was like, okay, so you're telling me that I'm going to debate the merits of non-monogamy from my lived experience in front of a healthcare professional that is focused on child development. That doesn't seem really fair, right? And they're just like, oh, you don't think it's fair? I was like, no, I don't really believe that I can, be very helpful in this conversation representing non-monogamy. If you brought another family, maybe we could talk about the lived experience of my family versus this other family. And she said, well, okay, maybe I have an idea because I found this other psychologist. She thinks ethical non-monogamy is an oxymoron. And she has a dad that is a psychiatrist that also doesn't believe in non-monogamy. So maybe they could be the family that represents the other side. And so just, obviously I didn't ask if the child care services would be on stage for this fruitful discussion, but it just made me so sad and realize like, oh, I'm in a bubble. I am surrounded by people like you, Paige, on Instagram talking about non-monogamy and alternative relationships and consent and communication. But the reality is that there is big players that are playing against us, right, in some way, and are building the story to work against monogamy. And that made me really sad.
Well, as soon as you talked about it, saying that it's a psychologist, the first person focused in child development, it's very clear that they haven't read any of the studies that have been done around raising children in non-monogamous relationship dynamics, because it is very clear that the quality is just as good, if not better, in those types of environments. So I'm just really wondering where they get their data from.
Yeah. I know, right? And this is what's really sad, right? Everyone is consuming their own information and their own data. And what's interesting is I don't think that what makes great families great in non-monogamous relationships is the non-monogamy. I think it's really a signal of adults that actually care about rethinking structures and rethinking how they raise kids and rethinking how they show up in the world. I think that is really the nugget. If I would assume that non-monogamy isn't really what's impacting directly the child experience, but it's rather like an indication of a family structure that rethinks norms and rethinks how they do stuff.
I totally agree with you because so often people are just raised in doing things how they've always been without really questioning if it's healthy, if it's good for the child development or what have you. And that's so interesting you bring up that point and that I agree with. Like, why are we arguing about non-monogamy itself being a thing? We should be arguing about what can be healthy for raising a family? What are the things needed to be involved to raise a healthy child? That's what we're worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know Carrie from Reimagining Relationships podcast, but she talks. Oh, right, she was on your podcast actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's great. I love her.
Yeah. But I think like the whole idea, right? Which is about like find what fits for you in your family.
Yeah, yeah. And gosh, I think what gets misconstrued is people have one idea of what non-monogamy looks like. And it's so interesting because as someone who works with people day in, day out, I've never seen the same relationship twice in a non-monogamous dynamic. They have all sorts of different variations of how they make it work from them. And so I think people often just have blinders on and get pigeonholed into just thinking one way that like is a representation. It's a misrepresentation of a whole community.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, what an intro. I imagine that that show is not going to go through with Dr. Phil.
Not for me, but probably someone else who wants fame will bite into this bait.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sticking to your guns and what you believe in. And I agree that is quite unfair to have people from just very different backgrounds trying to speak on topics. It doesn't really make sense. So, while we have that, why don't you introduce yourself to listeners and tell them who you are?
Yeah. Well, I will kind of say that I felt like I lived two parallel lives until pretty much 9 months ago, right? So I had the normie life, quote unquote, air quotes, normie life, which was I was an executive in tech. I worked at Square and Lyft and Adobe and all like the really cool brand names. And I had a family with two kids and went to business school in Berkeley. I did all of the regular things and which all made me feel fairly like empty, right? Like there was like a way that I did the things that society told me to do, but I really didn't feel like I was making an impact. I didn't feel like I knew who my identity was, and I didn't feel joy, right, and play in my life. And then I found non-monogamy about a decade ago, and that's where I found my nugget of me, right? So I would do all this work in tech, and I felt pretty unimpactful. I'd be like, did I actually drive any revenue for the company? And do I actually care that if I drove revenue for this company? But what I knew is oh, I have community on this other side, and I have 70 people that if I say that I organize a party, they'll all send me $100 for the party, no matter what the theme is. And I have these people that call me when they have jealousy issues. They say that I've transformed their perception about relating. So I was like, I see all this stuff, and I walk into these parties and events, and people are like, no. And I'm like, okay, there is this world that I see is available to me on my social life, quote unquote, that gives me impact, gives me identity, gives me pleasure, gives me creativity. And I don't know what to do about this regular life, theoretically, that everyone else considers like the whole life, which is where I felt that I didn't belong. So for many, many years, I kind of did this like parallel reality. And about a year ago, actually, I lost my job as part of another tech layoff. And I was like, I will be in the same place if I don't do anything else. Like I will find myself, I just turned 40. I'll be 50 in a job that I don't feel like I'm making an impact with coworkers that don't get me, and with a job that I don't care about the mission. and I'll be in the same place in 10 years, 100% if I don't change anything. So I kind of went down this path of finding my mission, or kind of like aligning your mission with what I saw as the nugget of meaning and identity. And I landed pretty much my dream job at Bloom. Bloom was already, it's like an app for counterculture people. So like me, people who are poly, kinky, and queer, think psychedelics, like thinking, rethinking, living on the edges of counterculture. And we help people find community through events and chats and dating. And it was like everything I wanted, right? Like everything I did with my 100 people that would give me $100 for my party, I can now do with 40,000 people that would give me $20 a month, and be able to like actually make meaningful impact both on organizers that are doing the work, kind of like you, and people who are educators, people who are event organizers, teachers, and on the other side, people who are actually lost, just like I was, and believe that there's maybe somewhere else a community that will like light up when they walk into the room.
And I'm so glad that I stumbled upon you. I myself was just like searching events on Eventbrite, just trying to find like types of support and education around non-monogamy for clients that I work with. And something told me, I'm like, okay, I have to reach out to this company because this is an amazing mission. It's clear that you guys are seeing something that is not really being done anywhere else. Like there's apps out there that are for dating or something like that, but not really for building community. Can you talk about the differences between your app and building community versus someone going on something like hashtag open or field or something like that?
Yeah. Oh my God. I do a ton of research onto these dating apps, and one of them, like, you have to pay $3 to give someone a compliment. And I was like, this is so sad. It actually, it's just so sad the amount of swiping and ghosting that happens on these apps, and how people, I'm imagining, right, just lay in their bed, swiping, and just reinforcing the narrative that there's no one out there, that you're doomed to a life of loneliness. And I'm like, there's people, hundreds and thousands of people out there hanging out, doing cool stuff. You just need, like, I don't even create the event. We're the platform for events. Like, you could just go out any day in these cities and do a rope jam and learn rope, or sit and do connection exercises, or do a poly happy hour, dance. Like, there's so many things. And I'm like, but the world, right, and especially social media, has just banned them. You can't talk about these things. You can't mark these things. So people just sit and imagine that their only way of finding connection is by swiping. So the insight that Luna, who is the founder of Bloom, had, is like, okay, how do we get people to actually find the communities that are out there? Because if you go to an event, you have a way better chance of finding someone. Like, you don't have to pay $3 to give a compliment. You can actually go and show up in front of people, right? Because that's what churches used to do, right? In some ways, churches used to give you context for connection, and people would say things along, I've never been to church, but I'm guessing that people said things along the lines of, oh, you're not my type because you don't have the right hair, but I saw you put down the chairs and help that woman, so I want to like go on a walk with you. Or, oh, you don't have the education that I expected, but I've noticed that you always pay attention to what people talk about, so I want to hear more about what you have to say. And dating apps don't allow that at all, right? Dating apps is just like looks, social status, swipe. But the truth is, like, we need more context for people to actually meet. So Bloom really enables that meeting in a more scalable way.
I'm so glad you brought up this point of this disconnect that there's these dating apps that are meant to help you connect and find someone to be in a relationship with, yet you're very pigeonholed in being able to learn about them. Like you said, the way of being able to meet people in person can give you that open-mindedness and flexibility by seeing a person in action, doing the human things that they do, maybe showcasing their kindness. And again, maybe if they're not, quote, your type, maybe you would swipe left on an app for maybe a look or a status. but see in person that they actually share a value and are practicing a value that you really desire in a relationship. I'm so glad you brought up that point. It's really sad that so many apps are really more focused on it being so binary. Do you have this? Do you do this? Whereas it sounds like the Bloom community can just allow you to be and exist and showcase yourself a bit more freely.
Yeah. And part of me is also thinking about the threshold, right? To meet. Like if you're on a dating app, like it's a big deal to go on a date with someone. And the truth is, how many people do you actually want to like date now? Like this is like a really big like threshold for connection. But I think what community allows you is to have like friends, right? I was just reading, and there's like a new book, The Other Significant Other, Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center with Rahina Cohen. And it just talks about friendship, right? Friendship is like this very like basic connection as if in some way, but this is the future, right? The future is, and in some way, if you talk to non-monogamous people, it's really about the friendships. Like how many partners can you have, right? And how many partners do we actually find interesting enough to be our significant other? But the truth is, like, there's so much more to friendship and connection. And when I talk to people about Bloom, I'm like, yeah, of course, every day I have people telling me that they found their relationship on Bloom or they find their hookup on Bloom. But I'm like, more often than not, you'll find the person to go on a hike with, and you'll find someone to talk about your jealousy with, and you'll have someone talk about what to do about your divorce process. And those things are really, really meaningful because that is what anchors us in being a human. And I want more of that for people.
Yeah, I also think you bring up another good point, especially on how in this monocentric society or mindset, we often think that there's different like levels of status for the different roles of people in our life, where we see our significant other as like way up high and a friend some amount of levels down. Whereas that really limits you into thinking, okay, like, well, what, your friend shop liver or something?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. You talk about how you get so many people bringing up friendship and getting so much out of it. That's actually what I've been referring my clients to because they don't really have that many people that they can talk to, especially people who might be transitioning from more of a swingers lifestyle into polyamory. There's actually a lot of stigma against going into having a more emotional side of things. And so I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to that or if you have any stories about what it's like as far as not having those really great connections and support going through those different non-monogamy transitions.
Yeah, you know who I look up to in so many ways is single moms. Like single moms, because they literally have no support, are my poster child for living in community, right? Because they're like, I literally cannot do this, right? So I'm gonna bring my kid to this birthday party and let them learn how to engage with adults, or I'm gonna ask my friend to pick them up from school because I literally have no one else. And I think that especially when you're in a monogamous lifestyle or even in a swinger style, which is very couple centric, there is this just like so much support and system built into someone has my back. And I think as you go into non-monogamy, you feel dropped so many times, right? And some of it is like the growing pains, like, oh, I'm growing out of dependence into independence, right? But being dependent doesn't mean like I'm doing it all by myself, but it's really about how do I resource myself on this journey. And I think that's where community comes in, right? Like that's where going to a workshop is, or, when I see on Bloom, we have a new to non-monogamy chat, and like people share, and the fact that other people relate to them or not relate to them or give them a different perspective, like that is where the magic is. That is like what allows you to keep going in some way, because it is so scary. Like our nervous system, when we start separating, our nervous system just feels like it's gonna die, right? It's like, I need to hold on because I don't think I will survive. And just having moments of interaction with other humans, I think in some way allows you to believe that there is a future, that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, it can be so soothing when maybe in the real life relationships you have around you, you don't have that kind of support, or you don't have someone who's maybe knowledgeable about how to navigate more difficult experiences in non-monogamy. But if you surround yourself with people who have either been there or who are also struggling with the same thing, but also have like the hope or goal to making it to the other side, gosh, you're going to be in a lot better hands than just either sitting alone or sitting with someone who's not supporting you on that journey.
Yeah. And I have an amazing friend. She taught me everything about metamors. She was my metamor. Anna Hirsch. She's a MFT. She creates all these cute art about relationships. And
Mm.
I have seen her like lean into community care in such a big way, like not hiding, like, oh, this is really painful. And I'm gonna be in pain around people, and I'm gonna allow people to see me in my pain, and I'm gonna allow people to hold me and walk with me. And that's like just so beautiful, right? Like, I think that allows you to show up in your relationship actually as a grown up in some way, because you don't just look at this one person and be like, only you can make me feel okay, right? There's like so many other people that can make you feel okay, and that will resource you to show up in the world and show up in your relationships in a beautiful way.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that can be a lot of times the downfall of a monogamous mindset is being so reliant and dependent on having your partner make you feel better, when it kind of gets your brain stuck in this pattern of not one, being able to soothe yourself, or when that partner's not available, reaching out to other people who could really help you calm down. So I love
Totally.
that. Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about, because I have an 8-year-old kid, we can talk so much, but she is like that. She drops wisdom. She teaches me so much about my jealousy or my attachment. It's just like incredible. But I've been thinking about how I have been trying to like make sure that she doesn't build as much shame as fast as society is trying. But then I've been like posting on Instagram a little bit, and I was like, wow, I can't write sex, I can't write orgasm, I can't write clitoris, like I can't write any of these words. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty intense to think that in today's world, she talks about vulva and she talks about orgasm and she talks about sex all the time. And to think about the moment that she actually logs into mainstream media and discovers that it's not okay to even say those words, like how intense to grow up this way.
Yeah, it's like, what are we teaching this generation that we're raising? That it's not okay to explore our body parts, like these things that are attached to our body, that are very important to know about so that we can either learn how to explore, whether that's, giving and receiving pleasure, whether that's just knowing the equipment we have and maybe how to communicate that to either our partner, our freaking healthcare professional, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah. So I think part of it is what I want, even for Bloom, is in the next generation, is allowing people to be able to like self-express, right? I don't want anyone to upload nude photos of themselves, because I don't think that that's the place we operate. But I'm like, why is even being able to say sex equivalent to uploading nudes? Even when I talk about content creation on Bloom, people are like, oh, but no, like not OnlyFans content. I'm like, no, there's like a massive gap between naked photos, which I don't think is what people are looking for, to being able to say like, oh my God, what do you do with like sex drive going down when you go through perimenopause? Like, how are these two things bucketed together around the tabooness or around self-expression? It's just like unbelievable.
yeah. And these are questions that people are Googling every day to try to fix their
Yeah.
relationships. So it's not uncommon that people are searching for information around this.
Right.
Oh,
Right. It's so true. You make me think about this website, Make Love Not Porn. You should interview Cindy Gallup. She's the founder of Make Love Not Porn. She did this big TED talk about, oh, wow, people are using porn for sex education. And her whole website is user generated, uploaded videos of regular people having regular awkward sex. And yeah, like so important, right? Like if we don't create the platforms for it, it will always be in the alleyways of the internet.
yeah. And you bring up such an important thing. If we're using porn as our education, where things are edited heavily in post, where things are scripted, where even adding in sound effects after or whatever in post, like what's going to happen when someone is laughing during sex? What happens when one of you farts or squirts or whatever during sex? And now all of a sudden, you start to compare yourself with what you've seen in your porn education. And then
Right.
you start to go down that shame spiral.
Yeah, I know.
Hmm,
Yeah. So
that's tough.
I wanna fix that or solve that or at least build an alternative reality. Yeah, it's interesting because I was just hearing Lily Lamboy. She created this nonprofit called the Modern Family Institute, which talks about reimagining families. And she was talking about how in the workplace, because she's an HR professional in her background, she talks about when you talk about non-monogamy, people are like, don't bring sex into the workplace, right? And she's like, why is me saying that I had a date night with my husband for our anniversary not bringing in sex into the workplace, but me saying that I went to my boyfriend's birthday party is bringing in sex into the workplace? So it's just like there's all these ways, and I even feel it, right? Like when I talk with my business school classmates or LinkedIn, like I feel like I'm hiding non-monogamy from the professional space because I feel like it's not okay. So it's, yeah, it's just so interesting to see how we all swim in it.
Yeah, as you bring that up, when people get defensive or start to say things like that, when someone is bringing up just talking about an interaction, maybe with an partner who maybe isn't their primary partner or partner that other people know about so much, that it's really a reflection of that person's assumptions and judgments that they have because nowhere in that conversation did
Yeah.
the other person mention sex, did the other person mention, what wild things that they are doing in their outside relationships. I hear that as a big lack of education about what non-monogamy really is.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
That's so true. You know how Dr. Phil was like, ethical non-monogamy is an oxymoron, right? But even the fact that we call it ethical non-monogamy, right? Like we've removed that phrasing from our app completely because even that in itself assumed that non-monogamy is unethical when it happens.
Yeah, I'm at this really interesting place where I'm trying to decide what to do about that because I've been gaining more education and being more informed around that. And you're right. Why do we say ethical non-monogamy when we don't say ethical or consensual monogamy? When a lot of times monogamy ends up being infidelitous and not actually monogamous. So it's really interesting how we have like this kind of categorization for this relationship dynamic when we don't do that for monogamy.
Yeah. And part of me is like, ah, is it a branding issue? Like it's just so long to say non-monogamy because every time I write it in email, I'm like non-monogamy. I'm like, ah, I wish I could just say E&M, which sounds so good. But yeah, part of me is like, oh my God, like some of it is so much phrases and words. And, if we know anything about our politics and stuff, really, the more liberal you are, the less good you are at marketing, I feel. So I just feel like we need to make it cool. We need to go back into finding a way to make it sound inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to be on the board or on the brainstorming team of that because that's going to take a lot of ideas, especially with shifting the generation that has control, at least over here in the United States, of so much say of what we do in our relationships or what we do in our bodies. It's making it really hard to not be stigmatized and to actually be out.
And to not be what I love Jessica Fern talks about in Polysecure is that so many non-monogamous people don't talk about the sexual part of it. And it's not that they don't care about it, but there is this stigma, right, that we have built that we want to talk about the possibility of loving more people or the possibility of expressing yourself differently. But no one, people don't say like, oh, it's also pretty exciting to have sex with new people and it feels amazing. So I do feel like there is a way that similar to how sex education has moved away from being about pleasure to being about knowing your body, knowing your boundaries, like a lot more like the consent tactical parts about of the sexuality versus a pleasure. I think the same thing is a little bit happening with non-monogamy, where we're focusing on the things that are a little bit less edgy, like sex, in order to be in that conversation. But I think in some way we're losing a part of it.
Yeah, very interesting you bring that up. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's still a very important part of the dynamic, if that plays a role in that relationship.
And swingers like know it so well, right? And I think it's so interesting because swingers get such a bad reputation in non-monogamous circles. And I think part of it is, swingers were some of the trailblazers of non-monogamy, right? Like way before consent culture. And they had their own culture and they had their own rules. And even if today we look at it and we say like, oh, it's less thoughtful in this way, or there's more assumptions in that other way, I do think that there is so much we can like appreciate about the ways that swingers have brought us to where we are today, and about the fact that it's just its own choice, right? Like if we call it polysexual, it sounds less, judgy to people. But there is something about like, oh yeah, it's just still on the spectrum of how you engage, and swingers own that so much of it is a sexual expression, and I think that is also like true to the world.
Yeah, and I love that too. This kind of gets me thinking about one thing of it's almost like it's so interesting how people might be so against or speak so harshly against anything around non-monogamy. When if you go to like the pornhub.com search history, threesomes are really popular, group sex is really popular. Like it's really interesting. These terms are highly searched, yet no one's really talking about it or cutting people some slack and just letting people be.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think there's like so much we like to talk about trauma and like this the stuff that so I don't consume a lot of visual porn, but I do a lot of erotica. So like lit erotica, which is such an old school. Like there's amazing apps now, like this Deep Sea and stuff like that, that is way better for erotica. But yeah, like a lot of the top ranking is mom and kid and like a lot of non-consensual stuff. And yeah, we cannot ignore the fact that there is trauma that is leading our behaviors and there's a lot of taboo. And if we don't allow people also to have any like healthy or diverse examples, people go to the edges. So I think that there's just something really interesting about how we know that these things are happening, yet we can't really deal with it, so we don't want to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to switch gears here and go a little bit back to the Bloom community. So I'm kind of curious if people are interested in either learning more about the different types of communities you have, do they necessarily have to identify like with one of the identities of the groups that they're interested in learning about?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's just so much that people post on it, so it's everything. I would say that the best way to use Bloom, or the people that get so much value from it, is people who are like starting their path. Because once you're in a community, you actually like know so many of the things that are happening. But if you're coming in, there's just like no onboarding into non-monogamy or onboarding into kink or onboarding into queer identity. So there is like everything that you want to explore, right? So we have like spirituality, sexuality, consent, and within it, there's just like so many workshops, whether online and or offline, and then different chat topics. And what's really cool, like we spoke about like the swiping experience before. What's really interesting is that we see that people match 10 times better if they have been at an event together, right? Which kind of is obvious after you think about it. But there is this reality of like, oh yeah, people have context and then they meet after. And part of it is like, I think similar to dating, where you have all these thoughts in your head about what you're looking for, right? So you're like, if I would go to a workshop, I really want to make sure that there's enough of this gender. I want to make sure that they do this, or what about the snack? But I'm like, you should just go out and see how nice it is to meet people. I host sometimes happy hour when I'm traveling around different cities, and people are like, I hate happy hours. And I'm like, I hate happy hours too. And you know what? it might be better than just sitting and watching Netflix. So, because you might just actually meet people and talk and have like, when I come out of a happy hour, I'm actually pretty excited if I'm with the right people, right? Not my sometimes business school friends, but if I can talk about like sexuality and relating and edge of culture stuff, I come up excited. So I think part of it is like when you go on to Bloom, there's so many opportunities to have entry level connection. I call it like low low investment, high quality connection. Like you can go out and meet people and have a good conversation without it being like the thing that you have to, it's not that like that your trip to Thailand that you have to like spend a lot of money, take 2 weeks off of work. I want more people to believe in the opportunity of connection without having to invest really heavily in it.
Yeah. And when you think about it, the amount of investment that that is compared to the investment someone is doing swiping on an app,
Yeah.
usually mindlessly, while they're doing some other task. So I almost want to say like in the negative of investment.
Yeah.
If you're like multitasking while swiping, still, you're right. That is such a low cost of energy or whatever it is to go try it out and see for the
Right.
possibility that could really yield some really great opportunities of meeting maybe lifelong friends or a romantic connection or a sexual connection.
And then I think about like what's our responsibility as tech companies in some way, right? Because I go on the other apps and swipe and I'm like, I'm unavailable for a relationship, to be honest, right? Like I'm married to my job pretty much, and I'm married as in addition to that, and I have like a few partners or lovers, and I have kids. I'm really unavailable to meet more people. And yet I go on these apps and swipe and ghost or like drop off. And why? Because I think that these apps create like a dopamine hit, right? Like, and the matching experience is so rewarding, right? Like someone chose me back. There's like, what's behind the swipe? Like maybe there's someone really interesting. So all of these things that make social media apps terrible for our actual mental health is the same things that make dating apps terrible. And then after you match, the extra lift emotionally and cognitively to meet people is so high that so many people drop off of that experience. You're like, okay, I got the match. Now I have to like actually engage in a conversation and see if you want to meet and see and actually go and meet and assess my risk level around meeting like a person that I don't know. Like there's so many hurdles on the way. So I think like our responsibility also for me, what I want is like, how do I get as much people out there as possible to actually meet in person and not just get them to feel the fake sense of achievement just by matching on the app.
Yeah. I was talking about the apps with my partner the other day because we actually met on a dating app and we're very, very fortunate enough to be successful in that after many non-successful experiences. And so we were talking about how it really is like that dopamine hit. Like you said, it's like people seeking that validation. And it's almost like a game for them to like prove to themselves about like their worth or that like they still got it or whatever. And then not realizing that when you ghost someone or when you just like get off the app or you don't go through with an experience all of a sudden or stop talking, that there's another real human person on the other
Yes.
end.
Oh my God, totally. I do think that, I've, oh my God, I was just writing about it in my newsletter. I was just thinking about the more we remove ourselves from the impact on the other person. I'm sure like the trolley experiment in psychology where you like push someone to kill one group versus the other. And they found that the more you separate yourself from the action that leads to people's death, the more you'll do that terrible action, right? So if you just click a button, you'll do it more frequently than push a person on the railroad to stop it. So there's like many ways. And I think the same is with this, what you're talking about with the dating apps, like ghosting someone on a dating app doesn't feel as intense as standing in front of a date in the middle of the date and just like leaving without explaining why you didn't leave. Right. So I
Yeah.
think there's something about how technology has allowed us to behave in ways that we would never behave if we were in person.
Yeah, it helps us avoid consequences of our actions in a way. And I think kind of makes people out to be really not actually in line with their values. I was having this conversation because I'm actually part of another app that focuses on dating. And I was having a conversation with someone. They were talking about this experience where they keep getting ghosted or they have these really awful experiences around the apps.
Well, I'm really interested in this idea of consequences actually, because I've been thinking about dick pics, which are like such a terrible experience.
Yeah.
Like it really feels violating to see them. And then I was like, what if we had like a hold on your bank, and if you send a dick pic, we would like debit your account for like $100 and send it to the person that you send the dick pic to.
Yes.
I know, right? That'd be so exciting, actually. It'd be so like rewarding. So I just like, I'm curious about this idea of like, oh, we're building all, because now on Bloom we can't upload any photos because of that, because we don't trust people. But I'm like, oh, we're building for the bad behavior instead of actually building for the vision and figuring out like what systems do we need in place in order to allow us to live like our dream life and avoid the bad behaviors.
Yeah. Well, if you come up with this idea where you have that consequences of debiting your account, let me know how I can invest because I want to see that happen.
Right, I
Um,
think there's something there.
yeah. I mean, I think this just all falls in line with, like we were temporarily talking about, and this will be the last thing I'll say on apps as far as swipe culture. Just, doing the mindless scrolling likely isn't in line with someone's values. And so they're already not going to feel good about swiping. And so they're also not going to likely feel in line with whoever they end up talking to because they're probably also on the other end doing the same thing. I think that's what's so hard about the dating apps nowadays. No matter what dating app it is, people really aren't on there to find a partner or multiple partners. They're on there to find validation.
Totally. Ugh. I have a friend that actually told me that they match, they chat with the person, and then they just go and masturbate.
I mean,
And yeah,
yeah.
like I think that's just like the externalization of the reality of this is actually about me.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Because does the other person know? Did they consent to, having that action as a result of the conversation? It's really more of sounds like an inward experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, well, we have to start wrapping up soon, but before I have you just say any last words, is there anything else that people should know about the Bloom community itself, or just for people trying to navigate their own experience as maybe some of these more marginalized identities?
Yeah, I think, well, what I think so many of us say that are in this industry is like find people, right? Like find a support. You kind of talked before we pressed record, you spoke about editing if we make mistakes. And I was like, yeah, like part of being a human is mistakes, right? And how do you join a community that allows you to make mistakes and kind of raises the hand, being like, oh, that didn't feel good. And actually teaches you the skill. So much of what I'm excited about is actually not being perfect for Bloom. It's like, oh, how do we create a space where people can give each other feedback when they say something that hurts someone's identity? Or then how do we actually create the experience of repair? People build a stronger trust and stronger intimacy with people. So yeah, just excited about the potential for all of us to make in this space by continuing to show up around communication.
I'm like on fire and excited and just can't wait to see as the Bloom community develops more, just what will come of it.
Yeah.
If listeners really loved what you had to say, can you say a little bit more about where people can find you, how people can join Bloom, or just like in general things that you're up to and supporting?
Yeah, totally. So I would say go out, but the come join our Bloom community on the App Store is like the way to go, or bloomcommunity.com can give you like a promo code also. We're a free product, but if you're a super bloomer, you actually go to the workshops for like 50% off. So I'll give you a code you can give with your community, but yeah, just download from the App Store, create an account, and just like meet people. There are so many cool people to meet out there, like hundreds and thousands of people waiting to meet you in the real world and give you a free compliment for under $3.
Yes, you do not have to pay to
Yeah.
receive kindness.
Yeah. And yeah, what I would say is like, thank you for doing this work. Like, I have learned because I think we're in the same space in some way. When you create content and podcasts, and what Bloom does is we are platforming other people at the end of the day. And the world and the internet is a very sex negative place, and it's so hard to navigate it. So I've learned from about so many different educators and um, therapists from your workshops. So I think like just keep on doing that work, because you platforming these people will allow other people to find their community and find their support system.
That's why I do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Noah, for sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, and your love and energy today. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you, Paige.
All right, listeners, I will make sure to have all of the information about Noah and about the Bloom community in the show notes. So until next time, take care.